Bem, vamos começar então.
Vamos começar, sim.
Tá, eu vou ser extremamente rápido e vou-me dirigir em português, depois a apresentação das comunicações será em inglês, pelo menos da professora Linda Evans. Não sei se a professora Amélia Lopes como
Também.
se exprimir
Vai.
também. Apenas para, em nome do Centro de Estudos Interdisciplinares em Educação e Desenvolvimento, agradecer a presença de todos. Esta é uma iniciativa de uma nossa comunidade de investigação e aprendizagem, uma Research Learning, Research and Learning Community, que é coordenada pela professora Leonette Thomas, que aqui está no comando das operações. No âmbito de um trabalho que tem vindo a ser desenvolvido, esta não é a primeira nem a última, tem um programa bastante vasto de debate no âmbito desta comunidade. Neste dia, ela convidou duas conhecidas e prestigiadas e muito publicadas autoras sobre esta problemática da profissionalidade, o tema com que o próprio Rilico se confrontou logo na definição de conceitos. Eu vou dar a palavra depois à Elsa, que é quem vai moderar e apresentar as nossas convidadas. Apenas para terminar, agradecer a presença de todos, and thanks to Linda and to Amélia to present and to be between us. Elsa, continua, por favor.
Obrigada, professor. Boa tarde novamente a todos e a todas. Good afternoon. I'm going to speak in English, so Linda can be with us also in this from the beginning. So my role is just to moderate this discussion and to present our participants, the invitations that we have here. So the first to speak is Professor Linda Evans, who we thank her presence here. She's Professor of Education at UK University of Manchester and Deputy Head of the University of Manchester School of Environment, Education and Development. She has also worked at universities of Warwick and Leeds and spent 15 years, sorry.
It felt like 50.
It sounds like 50 years. As a school teacher before becoming an academic. Linda has authored 8 books and over 80 academic papers and has presented keynotes in many countries, including Australia, Mauritius, France, Portugal, Indonesia, Brazil, and Republic of Ireland, and the Netherlands. Her research is focused on working life in education contexts, including professionalism, professional development, educational leadership, and workplace morale, job satisfaction, and motivation. Her conceptual models of professionalism and professional development are increasingly being adopted by other researchers as analytical frames. So I'll give you the floor, Linda. And once again, thank you for being here and share with us your thoughts and your work on these very important concepts and works that you have in all these years. Thank you very much, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Elsa. I'll just share my screen. So your screen sharing. What can you see, colleagues? Can you see the first?
Yes.
The
Is
first.
everything okay?
The title
Yes.
page. Yes,
Yeah.
that's fine. Yes.
And
that's all you can see is the title page. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes, that's excellent. Okay, right. Well, I'd like to begin by thanking Leonette for inviting me, along with my friend Professor Amelia Lopez and Elsa for introducing me there to speak at this roundtable discussion. And what I hope to do is introduce you to two conceptual models that I've developed over the years and that I now find are increasingly being applied by other researchers as analytical frames. I hope to get you to think outside the box, because I can guarantee that the conceptualization of professionalism that I have, the way I think of professionalism, will not be how you think of it. And I know that you will struggle to take on board that radically new conceptualization that I'm going to introduce you to. I'm going to start off by asking you a question about professional development. The next slide is not showing. Why is the next slide not showing? Oh, I see. We click on here. That's it. Yeah, okay, that's fine. Thank you. Right, developing what? Now then, when we speak of professional development, what precisely are we focused on developing? Not whom, what? What precisely are we focused on developing? Is it skills? Is it competencies? Is it behavior, perhaps? Or might it be knowledge? Or might it be attitudes? This is a really interesting consideration, and it's often overlooked. What we are focused on developing, in my view, is people's professionalism. But what I mean by professionalism, as I've just said, is very different from what you probably mean by professionalism. So I'm now going to spend a little while explaining what I mean by professionalism. Let me start with traditional understandings of professionalism. 20th century scholarship held that professionalism is a merit-laden concept. So it's something good, it's something people want, it's something people like to strive for, it relates to their status, and it's associated with belonging to a profession. And of course, only a few jobs were categorized as professions. The classic professions, the church, medicine, and the law. Okay. And what we had was what we call a trait-based ascription of professional status then. So specific criteria had to be met. For example, if you were a professional, if you were a member of a profession, you had to do a period of study for a long period of study. You had to be able to develop your own rules for what happened within your profession. These were the sorts of criteria that you had to meet. But these views are now considered outmoded by academics who research them and by the sociology, within the sociology of professions. You know, if you're of a certain age, as the French would say, these 20th century interpretations of professionalism may well be the kinds of understandings of professionalisms and professionalism that you were taught. And they're certainly the kinds of understandings of professionalism that many members of the general public hold. But as academics, we need to keep up. We need to keep abreast of evolving academic discourses and conceptualizations. And we need to make sure that our research is cutting edge, not yesterday's research. And what has happened over the last 2 or 3 decades is that by those, as I've just said, who research the sociology of work and the sociology of professions, these traditional understandings have been eclipsed. So if you want your research to reflect cutting edge scholarship, you need to move on from these 20th century, these views here, these 20th century perspectives that were part of the scholarship that went then. So what does such cutting edge 21st century scholarship say? Well, it accepts that professionalism is a contested concept. The sociology of work and professions has evolved a great deal in the last 2 to 3 decades. But in the vernacular, little has changed. On the one hand, the layperson, the man or the woman in the street still would say, well, professional status is something that you need to pursue. It's a really good thing to have. Yet, on the other hand, everyone likes to consider her or himself a professional. And Vilensky, many years ago, coined this phrase, are we to have the professionalization of everyone, he said. He was moaning when he said that. And what this has led to is, well, I'll give you 3 quotes that sum up how the academic field of professionalism has evolved. There's this one here. The sociology of professions has undergone radical changes from the golden age in the 1950s and 60s. Its decline is marked by some scholars as the end of professions and the death of professionalism. That's the source there for those 2 quotes. And then there's this one here. A different person has written this, Scanlon. This shift is identified as what might be called the advent of differently constructed new professionals. And if, as a researcher or an academic, you're writing about professionalism, it's important to pay very careful consideration to how you conceptualize, how you define it. For this evolution that's shown, that's summed up by these quotes here, this evolution within the sociology of work, or more specifically, the sociology of professions, has included an evolution in how professionalism is understood and defined. It's not that there is now a new conceptualization of professionalism among academics who research it. Rather, there have emerged several new conceptualizations, plural. Now, UK-based Professor Emeritus Ronald Barnett, who was at the University College London, refers to and delineates the characteristics of the networked professional and the features of what he calls the ecological or the ecological professional. He says we can pick out 5 ecological registers: the ecology of the professional self, the ecology of the client relationship, the knowledge ecology of professionalism, the ecology of the professional environment, and the discursive ecology of professionalism. And he likens 21st century working life to as if you're skating on thin ice. Always trying to, keep ahead or escape from the cracks that are appearing behind you. So you're always trying to look out at what's coming up next, what's coming behind you. That's Ron Barnett, his interpretation of professionalism. And then we have a Netherlands-based Mirko Noordegraaf. He's at the Utrecht University School of Governance, and he has this to say. He calls 21st century working life fuzzy and loosely ordered. He talks about pressured professionalism. So you can see there, it resonates with Ron Barnett's idea of ice cracking behind you and always trying to keep the pressure that you have to keep up to escape from the cracking ice. He talks about purified professionalism, which is the classic idea of professionalism, the classic professions. This, he says, rejects the notion of professionalism outside traditional professional occupational fields, which are the 3 I mentioned before: the church, medicine, and the law. But he also talks about what he calls situated professionalism. And that's something that accepts professionalism of traditional professionals working in organizational contexts that limit but do not eliminate professional control. So, for example, in the old days, a medical doctor, would be self-employed. Now, most doctors, certainly in the UK, I'm sure it's probably the same in most of Europe, including Portugal. Many doctors, of course, work in hospitals, as we know, and many general practitioners will work within a practice that includes several of them and will be managed by a practice manager. So this is a situated professional. We could call academics situated professionals, where we don't work for ourselves, we work for a university. And of course, that's the sort of control that is held over us, over our work. And then he talks about hybridized professionalism, that recognize professionals as a social class constituted of people who are reflective about what they do and analytical, but for whom their links with outside worlds are part of professionalism. So, he says this is not so much, this last one, hybridized professionalism. Noordegraaf says this is not so much about being a professional as it is about becoming a professional in modern times, or more precisely about showing that one is becoming professional without necessarily ever becoming one. Those are Noordegraaf's words, those last words, not mine. They are a little bit confusing. And then returning back to the UK, we have Julia Everts, another emerita professor who used to be at the University of Nottingham. And this is a quote from her. She's saying, we should no longer be saying, oh, you're a professional, but you're not. You're just an occupation. She's saying we should get rid of these divides, if you like. And she's saying we need to look again at the theories and the concepts that explain and interpret professionalism and professionals as a category of occupational work. Because, of course, she says, accountability and performance indicators, new managerialism, neoliberalism have now become a fundamental aspect of professionalism. So it's no longer self-control. The profession controls itself and its standards. These are now imposed upon us. She's a very she's a sociologist, very well-known UK-based academic who researches professionals. And now, of course, we have my own work, my conceptualization. Now, my conceptualization begins with the features that make up somebody's work, so the job that they're paid to do. And those features are exactly the same for everyone doing a paid job, no matter what they're doing. They're the same for every job or occupation at the basic level. I'll show you what I mean in a moment. They are these. These are the features that apply to every job. It's about what they do, what the practitioners do. It's about how they do it, what they know and understand, where and how they acquire their knowledge and understanding, what kinds of attitudes they hold, what codes of behavior they adhere to, what purposes they perform, and what quality of service they provide. And we may think of this list as a list of the different but related dimensions of doing a job. And I have actually represented these dimensions, this list, if you like, pictorially, or more precisely, diagrammatically, as a model. And this is what, you can think of that list I've just shown you as this. It's about doing something. This is the conceptual model that I've published several times over the last few years. And these different dimensions here, I'll go into detail in a few moments explaining them. But these relate to the list of features I've just shown you that apply to everybody's job, everybody's paid employment. It's a model of how I conceptualize doing work. So it shows all the components and dimensions of doing work. Okay. So look at this title here, doing. Okay, so we can have doing nursing. We can have doing engineering, doing designing, doing teaching, of course. Anything, you can add anything after the doing, any sort of paid job or paid occupation, as it were. And my point is that this model of the different components and dimensions of work or of doing a job can be applied to any job. And I've come to call it this, people's mode of being as. So you can again insert any word or words here to denote the doing of a job or a person's mode of being as a practitioner or professional or worker. People's mode of being as a butcher, for example, or as a police officer or as a university academic. And you could call it the different elements, components and dimensions of people's practice if you wanted all this. You could call it that. You could say, well, it's the dimensions of their practice. But I think it's bigger. I think it's wider than practice because it includes what underlies and what prompts or gives rise to what is normally classed as practice, like people's perceptions, for example. I'll go into detail in a moment about these. And it's as a conceptual representation of professionalism that I have actually published this particular model. Now, I'm going to talk you through these different dimensions and components in a moment, but if you want to read about them afterwards, probably the most comprehensive, the fullest account that I have of them appears in my 2018 book, Professors as Academic Leaders. In chapter 2, I explain each one in great detail, perhaps in more detail than I've got time to go into now. Okay, so let's look now back again at the model. This is a picture. This model is a picture, if you like, of how I interpret professionalism as a concept. Now, please note that this is absolutely in no way, shape or form a model that's got anything to do with achieving professionalism or becoming professional, because indeed, as I hope I managed to convey to you, as you probably know by now from what I've said, my interpretation of professionalism as a concept precludes such thinking, because I don't see professionalism as something that people can or would wish to or may achieve. I see it as simply how people are in their work. It's about the different elements and aspects of their work. And as I've just said, you could in fact call it their practice, except that, you know, as I said, I think it denotes more than that. But one of my own doctoral students is actually using this conceptual model as an analytical frame for her data. And she's choosing to refer to it as the dimensions of people's practice. That's absolutely fine. If it's easier for you to think of it as people's practice, because of course you may be struggling to rid yourself of a conceptualization of professionalism that associates it with only praiseworthy practice or job or occupational status above other jobs, then please do think of it as a conceptual model of practice if you prefer. That's absolutely fine. Or as people's mode of being in their work as a teacher or whatever. Okay. So let me just move on. Now, the behavioral component. The behavioral component, as I said there, relates to what people physically do at work. And that includes these different dimensions. The processual, I'll just go back one. The processual dimension, this relates to the processes that constitute people's practice, how they do or go about things. And this dimension accounts for what is likely to be the single largest proportion of a person's work-related activity. It is vast. The processual dimension is vast in what it covers. It covers a plethora of activities that represent multiple levels of hierarchically organized categories. For teachers, for example, it would include interpersonal interaction. But within that process, that's called interpersonal interaction, are included subcategories of interaction, such as interaction with colleagues, interaction with students or pupils, interaction with students' parents, interaction with school governors, etc. And the processual dimension of teachers' work also includes processes such as reading, writing, either by hand or by using technology, and speaking. So in relation to those processes, there's clear overlap with interpersonal interaction, because you may write to somebody. Or, you know, if a teacher writes a comment on a child's workbook, that counts both as interpersonal interaction and as writing. And this dimension, this processual dimension, includes subcategories of each of the things I've mentioned, such as mentoring people, training people, mediating between people, tutoring, class teaching, contributing to staff meetings, etc. So the processual dimension of a person's professionalism or occupation-specific activities, you can imagine others that apply specifically to other occupations, such as driving or piloting, machine or system maintenance, copy editing and painting. Think of all the processes that these people would go through. And of course, each of their constituent processes, such as in the case of painting, preparing a canvas, selecting brushes, cleaning brushes, etc. So I like to liken the processual dimension of a person's professionalism to a set of Russian dolls, you know, where each doll has a smaller doll within it and a smaller doll within that, and so on. Okay. The procedural dimension, of course, relates to the procedures that people apply to their practice, that the individual applies to his or her work. Where a procedure is defined as an established or official way of doing something, carried out in a certain manner or sequence or order. In procedural activity, the emphasis is thus on tradition or regulations or ritual or habit. Now, procedure overlaps with process, because procedures may encompass or be encompassed within a specific process. And whilst its enactment will always involve processes, you cannot have procedures that don't involve processes. You can have processes that don't involve procedures, of course, because, of course, procedures involve a set of rules or rituals. So that's the distinction. So for the teacher, for example, the procedural dimension of her work may include submitting a weekly plan of lessons to the head teacher or the head of department. It may include having to complete a health and safety assessment if the teacher wishes to take children on a school visit to a museum, say. It may include specific procedures that are in place for disciplining students, such as report the incident first to the head of department or the head teacher, etc., etc. And then we have the productive dimension, and this relates to an individual's output, productivity and achievement, to how much she or he does and how well, and hence what she or he produces or achieves. So in the example again of a teacher, the productive dimension of his professionalism is likely to be reflected in, among other things, how much effort he puts into his work, the hours he expends on the job, and what he has to show for such time and effort at the end. For example, is his classroom more attractively decorated than other teachers' classrooms? Does he spend time in lunch breaks or after school supporting students in some way? And of course, it relates to how much of the curriculum he covers effectively. It might relate to external networks that he sets up or newsletters that he writes. All sorts of things would come under this productive dimension. And then we have the competential dimension. And this dimension relates to an individual's skills and competencies. It concerns what she or he is able to do or can do. It indicates skill sets. Hello? Yeah. It indicates skill sets and aptitude for performing key elements or aspects of the job. In relation to a teacher, for example, and depending on the subject that she teaches, it may reflect the extent to which she's competent at handling and working with technologies or with specific tools such as laboratory equipment. It refers to generic teaching skills and competencies such as how to engage and maintain the interest of a class of students, how to explain complex ideas, how to control students' behavior, etc., etc. Okay. So just to show you once again, this is the model in its entirety. We've covered the behavioral component. Now I'm going to move on to the attitudinal component, the middle column there. Okay. And this, of course, relates, as the title suggests, relates to people's work-related attitudes. Now let's have a look at the different dimensions. So this perceptual dimension concerns perceptions, beliefs and views held and that have the potential to impact upon the individual's work, or that do impact upon the individual's work. In the case of teachers, the perceptual dimension may, for example, reflect their views on a multitude of wide-ranging issues, such as the extent to which parents should be involved in governing and running schools, whether education should be provided by the state, or if there's a role for private schools. Managerial, as it impacts upon schools are organised and on teachers' working lives. People may have a perception about that, a view about that. They may have views about teachers' professional autonomy, or whether leadership is a key determiner of school effectiveness. And it can also relate to more mundane perceptions relating to individuals' own unique work context, such as whether the gender balance in their department is acceptable, whether the school's senior management team is doing a good job, etc. Very important to note as well that this dimension, the perceptual dimension, also includes perceptions relating to oneself, hence self-perception and hence identity. And then we have the evaluative dimension. Now, I've put the E in brackets because it's a bit confusing to talk about evaluative. It's more to do with values, the values bit. That's why I've highlighted the value bit there. The evaluative dimension is closely linked to the perceptual dimension. It relates to people's values. This is important. You need to focus on the values part of the word, evaluative, because it's not about evaluation in the sense that the word is most often applied in the context of teaching and education. Now, I interpret values widely to encompass not only grand values such as social justice, democracy, freedom of speech, but also the day-to-day minutiae of what matters to people and what is important to them, what they value and what they like. So by values, I mean what's important to or what matters to people. And these might be things like ample car parking at work, a pleasant and attractive work environment, and an efficient and effective administrative systems. In the case of teachers, their values could, for example, range from relating to issues such as teachers' autonomy through the prestige of working at a high achieving or high ranking school. This might be important to some teachers, but not to others. Negative aspects of the work or the job that are, things that are disliked and therefore not valued are also encompassed in this dimension. It covers the entire positive, negative spectrum of values. And now, finally, excuse me, the motivational dimension. Now, this is influenced by the evaluative dimension, and despite its abbreviated label, motivational, it covers 3 job-related attitudes that I have demonstrated to be interrelated in my research that I did in the 1990s. Motivation, job satisfaction, and morale. Those are all included within that. And it relates simply to the levels of one or more of these 3 attitudes, not to what influences them, but to how high or low they are, how high a teacher's morale is, or a police officer's motivation is, or whatever. Okay, or whether they are demotivated. Again, it's the positive and negative spectrum. The whole lot is covered. Just to remind you again what the model looks like, I've done the first 2 columns. Now we're moving on to the final column, intellectual component here. Okay. And so this component relates to practitioners' professional related knowledge, understanding, or reflective or comprehensive capacity or competence and their knowledge structures. Basically, it's about knowing and understanding. And so we have the epistemological dimension. As its name implies, it relates to the bases of people's work, their work-related knowledge and their knowledge structures, whether, for example, their knowledge is accepted on the basis of its having been disseminated by an expert or authority figure, whether it stems from folklore and or superstition, whether it's derived from science or from self-discovery, as well as issues such as whether it is considered absolute or relativistic or contextual or provisional or immutable. This dimension also covers issues related to the nature of people's knowledge structures, such as whether their knowledge represents a collection of pieces of information or integrated concepts. A teacher may, for example, rely upon a knowledge base of what's important to teach children that comes from government policy documents, or it may come from her research, her reading of educational research literature, or it may come from conventional wisdom or occupational folklore, such as, oh, eldest girls in a family are likely to be good at science subjects, so expect such children to veer towards physics and chemistry. And then we have the rationalistic dimension, which is explained there. It's about reason. It reflects people's capacity for applying reason to their practice and the extent to and the frequency with which they underpin and justify their actions and their decisions with a rationale. And then we have the comprehensive dimension, which of course relates to the nature and extent of practitioners' work-related understanding. It's closely linked to the rationalistic dimension insofar as understanding may influence and explain rationality, while actions that have no rational basis may reflect lack of understanding of their nature and or of their consequences or implications. For a teacher, the comprehensive dimension of his professionalism relates to his subject knowledge and his pedagogic knowledge. It can also include other types of knowledge, such as knowledge of how organizations such as schools or educational systems work. And such knowledge may help the teacher navigate his way around administrative processes and barriers. It may also help him understand promotions processes and therefore how to be promoted. It can be very specific too, relating to knowledge about a specific family of children or a specific student and the student's background and family circumstances, etc. And finally, the analytical dimension, as you would expect from the title, relates to the nature and degree of people's analyticism and or analytical capacity. As with the comprehensive dimension, the analytical dimension may impact upon the rationalistic dimension of people's professionalism, insofar as analyticism may precede, underpin, and provide the impetus for rationality. Now, as I say, those are explained more fully in my book. So the main thing I want you to get from this is that professionalism is multi-dimensional. It's not just about one particular thing. And now I'm going to return briefly to the question I asked you at the start of my talk. Developing what? That was the question I asked you. And I said, is it any of these things or all of these things? And so, of course, when we speak about professional development, what we are focusing precisely is, no, it's not showing it. It should come up with professional. It should come up there. I've made a mistake with the sequencing. It should come up with the word professional, professionalism. There we have it. And so these two models are closely linked. My model of the componential structure of professional development is practically identical to the model of the componential structure of professionalism. And that's because change to any one of these dimensions here is what I call professional development. So the difference between these two models is that here you've got the word professional development, obviously. Here you've got the words development, whereas here you've got components. And where you've got the word dimension here, on the professional development model, you've got change. Okay. So only one dimension needs to change, in my view, for it to count as professional development. But what inevitably happens is that, like a domino process, change to one particular dimension, say the perceptual one, may then lead to change to people's values, which then leads to changing the processes they apply or whatever. So one can often spark off another and another and another and another and another. So you've got several components all changing in succession, and this then relates to professional development on a wider scale than just relating to one single dimension. For those who want it, further reading. Those are two really easy to understand explanations of what I've just been talking about. That's different, more further reading if you're interested in it, not quite as easy, more academic, you know, not as easy to understand. And if any of you are interested in educational leadership, those are very radical and provocative views expressed in those articles there. And so I'm now going to stop sharing. I'm quite happy for these slides to be available afterwards. Stop sharing. Are you no longer seeing the presentation? You're seeing me, are you instead?
Yes.
Excellent, right.
Yes. So have you finished now, Linda?
Yes, I have, yes.
So thank you very much. Thank you very much. I think we are leaving the questions after Professor Amelia makes her intervention, and then we will give the floor to the participants and they can ask all the questions they want. Do you agree with that? No, you are not listening. Yes? Okay. Yes. I think I'm freezing, no? Yes. Am I freezing?
No, we can hear you.
You can hear me? Oh,
yes.
Yeah. Sorry. Yes, sorry, I'm fine now. Yes.
No,
I clicked on the wrong thing. Yeah, absolutely happy for Amelia to go next, and then we have questions. No problem at all.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Linda. I think we will have a good discussion at the end. Yes. You're quite provocative. Yes. Yes. So I think we have now Professor Amélia Lopes. She's a well-known professor in Portugal, as she works in the Faculty of Psychology and Education Science at the University of Porto, where she also is the president of the Scientific Council. She's the deputy director of the Center for Research and Intervention in Education, also in this faculty, and the co-chair of IDEA4, which is the research center group on identity, democracy, school administration and training, and also is an advanced training group. And also OBVIE, the Observatory of Life in Schools. She's well known for her leadership and research in the fields of teacher education, teaching profession, professional identities, including academic identities, and research and teaching nexus. Other research areas include also the education and democracy, school education, schools and creativity, higher education, and doctoral education. She has published extensively on these topics, both nationally and internationally, and beyond diverse international projects. Recently, she co-led the Rekindle Plus 50, a collaborative research on veteran teachers and use of technologies, and she coordinates the 50 years of teaching factors of change and intergenerational dialogues, and awarded by both awarded by the Portuguese research funding agency FCT. So we thank also Professor Amelia for being with us, and now I'll give her the floor to her presentation, please. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Elsa. Welcome, all of you. I would like to say just at this beginning that it was a very big pleasure or honor to be with Professor Linda Evans in this roundtable. She's somebody I admire since the beginning of my career, and I thank the organization for these opportunities. Thank you, Linda, and thank you for the corrections in the PowerPoint too. So I'm going to share the PPT. I'm not seeing you, so. But I'm seeing the PowerPoint, but not you. So no. I don't know if it is possible to do other way, but for me, that's okay. We see at the end
now.
So
no.
Não estamos a ver o PowerPoint.
Não estamos a ver o PowerPoint.
Não.
É porque eu não partilhei, penso eu.
Exato.
Agora já está.
Agora já. E estamos a ver lá assim também, portanto.
Ótimo.
Está tudo bem. Ok.
Ótimo.
Acho que está.
So, we can start. So, in this talk, I intend to present conceptual aspects within the scope of professionalism through the research made in Portugal on teachers and teaching profession. Today, and more than before, it is not enough to take into account what has been produced in the scientific community, but also the different interpretations given to it according to cultures, historical moments, contexts, and the specific challenges to an educational system. Indeed, the topic of teacher professionalism is a good example of how the trajectory of a concept can be influenced by these factors. I did my initial training as a teacher in the second half of the 70s, after the revolution in 1974, with great cognitive, relational, and political professional involvement. In the documents framing that training and in the curricula of the subject disciplines, the teacher was seen as an intellectual and a professional. This word was used to mark the difference from half a century of true devaluation of the profession, of the teaching profession. Now the ideal teacher was a teacher professional trained and acting individually and collectively for public education in today's language for social justice and the emancipation of students and the people. It was a very particular moment that many of us experienced closely. It was the first day, all and clean. Era o primeiro dia, inteiro e limpo. Both in that period of strong mobilization in schools and in the period of normalization, post-revolution, the argument for professionalism was the banner, or professionalization was the banner of the necessary educational innovation that was urgently needed. In the following 10 years, the basic law for the education system was approved. Portugal joined the European Economic Commission, and degree courses in educational science, teacher training courses in new and old universities and polytechnics were created. The field of research in education and teacher education was then opened in Portugal. The changes inherent to the social and educational transformations made the study on teachers proliferate. Teachers, it was known, would be the great hope for the future, and teacher training would be its possibility. The book of António Novoa, The Time of Teachers, published in 1987, uses the theory of professions to build the scheme of analysis of the development of the teaching profession in Portugal until the end of the Second Republic. The article of Helena Araújo, published in 1985, is called Teachers' Professionalism. And the article of Teresa Estrela from 1986 has the title, Some Considerations on the Concept of Teaching Professionalism. In this first stage, professionalism was mainly used to talk about how the teaching profession could be valued. However, the term professionalism always raised some discomfort, less felt by researchers with an English-speaking influence. As professionalism studies have a whole history associated with favored classes, to yearn for professionalism advocated by the founders was to betray the people, or the very innovation that was intended to be implemented with the new teacher. The refusal of orders, class deontological codes is based on this criticism. The distancing of teachers' professionalism from that of elites is something that marks the whole history of teachers' associations in Portugal. It is therefore understandable that the above-mentioned article of Helena Araújo is about the possibility of professionalism being compatible with an emancipating and committed teacher discourse. The article aims to answer some questions. Is professional a defense of corporatist interest, as some analyses claim? Are teachers limited to complying with rules established by the central power, or do they seek to intervene in the regulation of their work process? The author concludes on the importance of teachers, importance for teachers of holding a specialized knowledge against amateurs and mercenaries, of higher education training, of the existence of professional associations, and of the ideal of service. And she concludes, the support given to professionalism, seen in studies done in the 70s, both in England and the United States, has been seen as a strategy to achieve status and power in society, and as legitimizing the social structure. However, in the study carried out, we can speak of a rearticulation of professionalism with new elements that do not allow it to be reduced to professional strategies for obtaining status. Even with an articulation that is not always systematic and coherent, says Helena, it reveals strategies of teachers who seek to change their role as agents of cultural reproduction. For reasons associated with the political and ideological dynamics, but also with development of ideas in education, in the following decade, there are few studies addressing professionalism itself. The concept of professionalism gave way to those of professionality and might translate always translates professionalism and professional identity. This distribution of the use of the concepts is visible in the number of publications of the concept since the 80s. As we can see, the production is in 1:2 ratio in the case of professionality, and in 1:5 in the case of teacher identity. And in this other scheme, made within the framework of a literature review carried out in 2003, this change is also visible. The green line corresponds to publications with an emphasis on professionalism, and the red one to publications with an emphasis on identity. Until the new millennium, it is the issue of educational change that will be at the center of the debate, more than the possibilities of social affirmation of the teaching profession. The question was, how can teachers change, innovate, or develop individual and collectively? And innovation in Portugal is always a transformative perspective. So, although this turnover may be due to national specificities, it is also true that it accompanies the emergence of a new way of conceiving the relationship of professionals with their profession and of professions with society. And we have listened, Linda, about this. In professionalism, the competencies and only a moment. Okay. And ethics are previously defined for the social professional group seen as a classical sociological category. There are professional associations and employers who watch over them, exercising vigilance, and in initial training schools, future professionals must internalize a basic professional ethos. In the construction of professional identity, for real social change, concept that has had more impact on identity studies in Portugal, professional socialization in work contexts is central. Professionalization is an internal and situated process of communication, recognition, decision, and cooperation. Its outcomes are individual and collective professional identities, where personal fulfillment and social creativity are mutually constructed. The conceptual framework includes professionality. But if the notion of professional identity construction focuses on dynamics and content, the notion of professionality focuses on structure and content. And then when I say content is about techniques and knowledge and about values and ethics. This shift is the most chosen in the most chosen concepts to talk about teacher professional empowerment and teaching profession, shows a displacement of research interests from the society of professions to the communities of professionals. This was the time of schools seen as places to develop and extend the autonomy of teachers and their specific knowledge based on personal exposure, small groups sharing, organization awareness. Portugal was then experiencing what Believer calls school-based curriculum development, in the belief that teachers, through new ways of working together, would improve the quality of education and students' learning, and thus also their professional status. It will become apparent soon apparent that many aspects of teachers' practices and actions in schools cannot be negotiated within them alone. These aspects concern the macro level of analysis and included relationships with the state, professional associations, production of scientific knowledge, and initial training, that is, many of the entities usually appreciated in approaches to professionalism. Fortunately, in the meantime, the investigation of professionalism also undergoes important developments. The macro level of approach is now inspired by a more interactionist, dynamic, and phenomenological perspective. The new perspective on professionalism, perspectives, plural, as Linda said, integrates functionalist, interactionist, and power approaches, thinking about the role of society, the state, and professional associations, but also about individuals, small groups, and organizations in the process of professionalization. In short, articulating professionalism, I think, with professional identities and professionalities. Evetts characterizes these new perspectives on professionalism in the first decade of the millennium in 3 topics. Professionalism represents a distinctive form of decentralized occupational control that is still important in civil society. The pursuit of self-interest can be compatible with the enhancement of the public interest. And the professionalism can create and represent distinct professional values or moral obligations that restrict competition and encourage cooperation. That restrict competition and encourage cooperation. The new perspectives on professionalism have also 2 important consequences. They emphasize the process, the becoming of acquisition of status rather than their ideal attributes that are now a source of analysis. The discourses on the profession construct the profession itself, namely at the symbolical level of professional status. This enormous conceptual advance is accompanied by the identification of levels of analysis in the construction of professionalism or in the process of professionalization, from which I highlight the distinction between professionalism from within and professionalism from above. An idea from Linda, from Julia Evetts, but taken from McClendon. The ecological view of the construction of teachers' professional identities, something I argued for, brings together these new perspectives, identifying conditions for successful interactions towards the professionalization of teaching at individual level, from self to self, from self to her, himself, interpersonal level, among colleagues, institutional level at school, political level with education policies, and societal level. In the concept of professionalism, or if the concept of professionalism elucidates the most objective conditions of the professionalization process, the ecological vision of the construction of professional identities elucidates the internal and subjective conditions of that process. And like this, a consistent and heuristic framework of analysis clarifying the conditions of the process of professionalization of teachers was available. For their part, teachers need both to develop in schools an effective and valued professional knowledge, and outside them, an intentional social strategy with a view to the recognition and legitimization of their social value and freedom of choice about specificities of work and occupations. Much of the theorization we have referred to and its real impact was interrupted with the sort of neoliberal policies on the autonomy still perilous teachers in Portugal and also in other countries. The need to control the teacher's subjectivities and social power is a fundamental issue for the ups and downs of teaching as a profession, and then for the very theories of professionalization and professionalism. The forms of control of teaching always involve the devaluation of teachers or the deprofessionalization of teachers. About the Portuguese case in the post-revolutionary period, Stefan Stoer argues that in order to better control teachers, the state not only dispensed with the professionalism of teachers, which was taken over by the unions, but also blamed teachers for the excesses of the revolution. The same will happen with the rise of managerialism, that to establish itself develops a whole discourse of distrust about teacher autonomy and decentralized school management, blaming schools and teachers for students' bad results. The propagated professional virtues are imposed from the outside, replacing teachers' previous commitment with external forms of accountability. The wheels of governance generate an artificial and uncomfortable professional teacher identity, and the teachers feel like frantic automata. The impact on teachers, but also on the profession, has been a disaster. Some adapt to maintain recognition and not to lose honor. Others give up the profession, and others never choose to become teachers. The forms taken by these professionalism, neo-professionalism, have caused the teaching profession to lose its attractiveness in Portugal too. The seriousness of this circumstance has been leading to the development of studies on how to return to professionalism inside out or from within. The urgency to reconnect teachers as people to their profession needs the possibility to recreate the profession as an exercise of freedom. Firstly, by refusing neoliberalism, and then by affirming individual and collective agency in 3 stages. The individual one corresponding to what I, inspired by Linda and her model, called analytical professionalism, joining reflection and research. It is based on curricular and pedagogical creation. The inter-individual and school-based collaboration I called communicative professionalism, and the participative professionalism centered on political and social development of value discourses on the teaching profession. Even if an interaction between inside and outside, a negotiation between inside and outside, inside out, outside in, agents is necessary, in the process of professionalization, what I want to stress with these 3 types of professionalism to the same teachers, what I want to stress is the levels of professionalism for each teacher, which teachers need to be specifically educated or develop. These levels of professionalism, they themselves congregate the main contributions of each one of the concepts I talked about. Professionalism, professionality, and professional identities. To end, I would like to highlight 3 ideas. What generally characterizes the last century in Portugal, before and after 25 April, is the denial to teachers of their professionalism from within. Continuing not to problematize it can be a way to maintain teachers under control. We need the concept of professionalism, I think, as it is the concept in this triad that best articulates the social power associated with professional power, knowledge, ethics, and recognition. And in the teaching profession, this is crucial. The diversity of concepts, sometimes in competition and sometimes in dialogue, has been and will be a condition for professionalism to remain alive and relevant, I mean democratic. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Professor Amelia, for this very good